pleasure to welcome everyone to today's event. I'll be brief as I know we have a full and very interesting program ahead. But let me first talk about KIX and our KIX EMAP Hub to some of you who are new to our hub and to the KIX program. So KIX stands for Knowledge Innovation Exchange and is a global partnership for education mechanism developed and implemented in collaboration with the International Development Research Center in Canada. KIX is facilitating research, applied research, knowledge sharing, and exchange among GPE partner countries to support them in their mission to improve their own education policy outcomes. Our KIX EMAP Hub, and EMAP stands for Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Asian Pacific, is one of the components, one of the pieces of the larger KIX program, and is hosted by NORAG, the Global Education Center in Geneva. Last year, our hub, after 3 years of activities, was extended up to 2027, and the hub grew as well from 21 countries to 36 countries. Our hub aim continues to be focused on our mission to surface, amplify, and use research evidence for policy and planning in the EMAP GPE countries. And the event today is part of this mission. This inter-country exchange on inclusive education covers 5 countries in the Europe and Central Asia region, which are Georgia, Moldova, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. And this is conducted in the context of our rapid customized country support mechanism that we are currently piloting as a way to respond to specific demands from our partner countries to mobilize research evidence into policy and practice priorities. And this is exactly in the spirit of this activity that started some months ago, at several key milestones, including successful learning visits to Georgia and Uzbekistan, and that promoted knowledge exchange among institutions of these 5 different countries on inclusive education policies and practices. While we say that today's event is a concluding symposium, the work and the relationships created in each country and across countries will continue. The hub will be ready to support all of the last efforts to finalize the national situation analysis reports, the databases on inclusive education, and the comparative country analysis, all with the objective of making this knowledge useful for policy and practice in any of the 5 countries, but as well of the other countries that would like to learn from this experience as well. And our ultimate goal is that some of this work, some of the knowledge that has been mobilized can be useful to contribute to improving the reality of inclusive education in our region, to benefit the children who need a chance to have quality education. So in all of these steps, our national experts counted and will continue to count with the guidance and direct support of our knowledge lead for Europe and Central Asia, Jules Levin, and our project officer, Veronika Muzulova, who I thank for all the support and all the commitment towards making this activity a success. So now I look forward to listening and learning through these events, and I hand over to Julia to continue us in this in the next steps. Thank you all.
Большое спасибо, José Luis.
Thank you so much, José Luis. I would like also to welcome everyone on behalf of KIX EMAP. My name is Julia Levin. I am the knowledge lead, and I closely cooperate with countries of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, and it's a great privilege for me to open up this concluding symposium for inter-country exchange on inclusive education, which is a result of over 2 years of productive work. Inclusive education is one of the most important innovations of the recent decade, reflecting the principle that any child, regardless of their abilities or opportunities, have the right to quality education, meeting their needs and opening up their potential. And this has been a joint effort of Ministry of Education and NGOs from the 5 countries of the project. Altogether, we started summarizing the knowledge accumulated, exchanging the experience, and studying the issues related to the policy and practice of inclusive education. It was not only just a knowledge exchange, but also it was an effort to build bridges for mutual understanding and cooperation. The knowledge exchange enabled us to better understand how we can better introduce and develop inclusive education. And we made a joint contribution to creating a pool of knowledge and data that might be very useful for people who take interest in developing inclusive education. So let's consider the concluding stage of this journey not as an end to the journey, but as a beginning to a new opening journey towards a better cooperation. And we do hope that these initiatives will continue to inspire us for future cooperation and productive work. I want to thank all the participants of the project for the dedication, for the enthusiasm. Let's keep on the dynamics and continue introducing the policies and practice that would make inclusive education a real opportunity for everyone who needs it. And now I want to pass it over to our moderator, to Aida. Please, Aida, the floor is yours now. Hello, dear participants of the Concluding Symposium on the Intercountry Exchange of Best Inclusive Education Practices. And in reality, the project has been implemented not just by the participants from the 5 countries, but really experts and very dedicated, enthusiastic people from the countries. And uh, uh, so our regional coordinator of the program, Farida Ruskulova, will share about the mission and major goals of our project. But before that, I just wanted to tell you, dear colleagues, that we are going to have about 19 minutes for this symposium, plus minus 10 minutes. And please share your comments, questions, or recommendations in the chat so that we will have enough time to listen to our country teams and to ask questions. Thank you, dear participants. Let me introduce an overview of the KIX EMAP project.
Allow me to present my report on the results of our program as part of the RCCS program. As my colleague said, this was a lengthy process, and we managed to learn quite a few things as part of the project. The project involved the creation of a consortium of 5 national teams, as Aida said, which included representatives of ministries, inclusive organizations, and civil society organizations. Each group had its national coordinator, Gulnara Bibileshvili in Georgia, Tatiana Chabrova in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. I was the national coordinator, Moldova, Viorica Kukujara, and the other 2 ladies on the screen. And we'll hear from each, we'll learn about each of these groups today. As part of each program, we heard from the national experts. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about the project frame that was given. The target group were children with disabilities and special educational needs. So in each country, a policy was developed different policies were developed for these children. We focused on the process of admission to school, technical supervision of these children and their instruction processes. The main focus, we focused on policy, and as a result, we exchange experience between the countries in this area. The goals of the project, as mentioned, were to study the experiences of consortium countries in implementing inclusive education policies, conducting a comparative analysis of methods and approaches used, and disseminating knowledge on good practices between the colleagues of the 5 countries. The project took part in 3 stages. The first stage was collecting country information and preparing country reports. As a result, each country has its own legislative basis, legal documents, and organizations that work in this area. This slide shows the structure of the databases, which allows you to search data and find everything you need. Every country produced a report on how this can be used and practiced. The next stage involved knowledge exchange and experience, and there were trips to Georgia and Uzbekistan. During these trips, our colleagues met with parliament representatives, people from the ministry, people from the education facilities, and also with colleagues from NGOs. For each task of the project, a mini group was organized with representatives of each country, where participants exchange knowledge and experience on the questions under discussion. During the next stage, our representatives produced an analysis and disseminated knowledge. We'll hear more reports today on the results of this comparative study on inclusive education in the 5 countries. Now we're in the 3rd stage of knowledge dissemination. We're conducting an online symposium for a broad circle of participants. During the next stage, we're going to publish the reports on official institutions and organizations that took part in our study. We are nearing the finalization of the project, and we expect that this project will favor the positive implementation of knowledge gained through the project. We expect that collaboration between government and civil society will continue to ensure developing equal access to education for children. And we expect also to establish long-term partnerships through a sustainable platform that will further knowledge sharing on inclusive education. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Farida. I can see that there's a comment in the chat box. Why didn't you tell us before this? We also would have joined this activity. And I think that one of the last comments you made, Farida, is that a long-term partnership and platform is being created, and it's very important for all those who have the experience and desire to take part. Now we're going to hear from representatives of each country team, and each of you will have 8 minutes. Using my rights as moderator, I'm going to watch the time and will warn you briefly before the end of your presentation. You can use the chat box to give your comments and questions during the presentation. And I want to remind you once again that our symposium working languages are Russian and English. So take note of the globe towards the bottom of your screen, where you can choose the language of of simultaneous interpretation. I would like to give the floor now to my colleague from Georgia, Gulnara Bibliashvili, who will talk about the experience of her organization. I'd like to welcome all of the participants today, and I will do my best to provide info about our main achievements. Can you move to this first slide? Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to point out that the legislation of Georgia is fully adapted and harmonized with EU legislation. And here you can see the main list of documents based on which Georgian inclusive education policy and practice is being developed and carried out. Despite the serious political challenges facing our country, inclusive education began operating already starting in year 2000. Next slide, please. As for the national legal framework, the Constitution of Georgia is the critical document, and I want to point out that all schools are obligated to include all students with special education needs in the educational process. And schools also receive additional resources to meet these needs. And in Georgia, we have the so-called National Science and Education Strategy for 2022-2032. And we see these schools as specialized schools as a resource for mainstream schools going forward. It's also important to keep in mind that our country has now a third national curriculum approved, and based on this plan, for each children, an individual teaching plan will be developed. Next slide, please. As for the key characteristics of education, it's important to note that all schools are required to be adapted to certain standards. According to these standards, each school must have special facilities, a resource room, which is a place where students can receive additional services individually or in small groups. Also, schools have special school security officers whose purpose is to ensure the physical, psychological, and emotional safety or a safe environment for children in the public school. On this slide here, I've indicated at the bottom the website of our organization, our structure that provides more information about these standards. Next slide, please. I also want to point out that on the basis of our third national plan, as I mentioned, individual plans are developed. Individual curriculum plans are developed for each student that may also include expanded modules or assistants and extended curriculum. You can find these details in our report. And please switch to the next slide. On this slide, I wanted to emphasize that we have the following formats of education: homeschooling, distance learning, and individual learning. Next slide. It's
Дорогая Гуна, 5 минут прошло.
5 minutes. Okay. Yes. Okay. It's also very important that we have a universal design. And that means that the environment needs to adapt to the special needs of inclusive education students. So let's move now. I'd like to move on to the project outcomes. So the project outcomes, first of all, our team emphasizes that a consortium has been successfully established to study, and this consortium is the main result. Also, a comparative analysis of methods and approaches has been conducted and best practices disseminated. So what have we learned? What have we learned? We took part in visits to Georgia and Uzbekistan, which showed very clearly that the consortium countries have much in common historically and culturally. And we have many resources and potential for further improvement. And finally, we last slide, please. So, the consortium needs to develop projects and continue working on several issues. We need to be working on the legislative level through information sharing on current reforms. We need to work together at the executive level, piloting best practices, and finally work together on the academic level through developing programs at the university level and in school education through the involvement of experts. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that any questions that I'll be able to answer questions later.
Был у нас один общий вопрос относительно...
Yes, we had one common question regarding using the materials further on in English and Russian, and our coordinator is going to speak about this later. Dear participants, please feel free to ask questions to the countries, to individual speakers, but don't forget to introduce yourself. Thank you very much, Guna. And now over to Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyz team was very active in our project. So Anara Nadirbekova from the Eurasia Central Asia Foundation is going to share the outcomes. Please, Anara. Anara, please unmute yourself. Just click on the microphone icon. Could you click on it once again? Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry. I'm very glad to welcome all the participants of this symposium. It's a great privilege to share the experience of Kyrgyzstan today. So this is the background of inclusive education in Kyrgyzstan that started actively in 2004. Though back in 1996, at the initiative of some parents' organizations, we started discussing inclusive education, but only later that became possible. And today, we in Kyrgyzstan, we have a lot of international organizations acting to promote inclusive education. You can see the World Bank, USAID, UNICEF, and many others whose logos you can see on this screen. So the major document in Kyrgyzstan that regulates the development of inclusive education is actually the law on education that was finalized in summer 2023, and today we can say that in the country, inclusive education, the concept of inclusive education is now part of the legislation. We also have the state standard for school education and some other laws that create the background and platform for promoting inclusive education in the country. Speaking about inclusive education policies, we should mention 6 major documents at the national level. This is the concept of inclusive education that was developed in 2018, and the implementation started in 2020. Another document is the state standard for basic school education of children with disabilities for children falling under 8 different nosologies. The standard was initiated by parents' organizations and supported by the Ministry of Education and Science. And now the regulation of psychological, medical, and pedagogical consultations is under discussion. And the inclusive education policy is being finalized, and it should be approved by the government soon. When we speak about inclusive practices, so we need to mention the program for the development of inclusive education in general education facilities. Many school directors, school principals joined the initiative, and we can say that about 10% of all public schools in the country are now successfully implementing inclusive education programs. There also we have guidance materials for enrolling children in inclusive education, individualized rehabilitation education plans, qualification requirements for specialist teachers working in inclusive education, and we also have regulations on psychological and methodological support approved by the Ministry of Education, and also the parents community initiated the drafting of a national program that was drafted and approved by the Ministry of Education, and actually ensures accessible environment for children with disabilities in public educational institutions. Next slide, path towards inclusion. I cannot say that we're really advanced in terms of inclusive education practices, but we're working on it. And we started with training of specialists. We created inclusive education laboratories. We conduct school day practices. We have developed methodologies, and we also use the method of bioacoustic correction for working with children with disabilities. We also now discuss the national strategy for cooperation between schools and the parents of children with disabilities. Your 5 minutes is up. Yes, I'm finalizing. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. So, next slide, please. We had a great opportunity to visit Georgia, to get to know the experience of Georgia as well as other countries. And we learned a lot about the process of drafting and adopting legislation by the Georgian MPs. This is something that we would like to use in our country. We also learn a lot about the training of specialists and the automated system for parental application seemed amazing. Georgia has multidisciplinary teams at the district level. They develop individual evaluation plans and they have reorganized the so-called specialized schools into resource schools. And altogether, these advancements are really impressive. And now a couple of words about the experience of Uzbekistan. We really learned about some things that we would like to implement in our country. First of all, this is the very active involvement of the Ministry of Education of Uzbekistan that places a great focus on the training of specialists and on using innovative approaches to inclusive education. Also, I need to mention the Republican Center for Professional Guidance and Psychopedagogical Diagnostics of Students, as well as their experience of organizing inclusive education and evaluation in schools. A couple of words about the recommendations. First of all, digitalization of support services, introducing the support of a second teacher.
В Узбекистане, а также цифровизация образовательного маршрута.
Creating a center for psychological and pedagogical diagnostics and digitalization of educational approaches and support. That's it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you, Anara. We have a country partner from the ministry. Sultanat, please, the floor is yours now. You have a couple of minutes. Sultanat, can you please raise your hand so that we could unmute you? Yes, we can also see a couple of questions to our colleagues from Georgia in the chat. We will be getting back to these questions during the Q&A and discussion session. Now the floor is yours, Sultanat. Sultanat, we cannot see you. Could you please raise your hand?
Вернемся к Салтанат чуть позже, когда...
Okay, maybe we should get back to Sultanat later on during the general discussion. Evgenia Boyko, I can see you have raised your hand. You can unmute yourself now, please, but be quick. Okay, let's postpone these questions then till the general discussion and let's continue with the country presentations. Moldova was one of the most efficient and active participants of the project, so it's my pleasure now to pass this on to Moldova. I'm sorry, colleagues, I represent the Ministry of Education, Sultanat, and myself. Yes, then the floor is yours, Sultanat, but please be very brief and describe your contribution to the project. Yes, welcome. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of Education of Kyrgyzstan, I would like to thank KIX EMAP for the opportunity to get to know some positive practices from Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Moldova, and I'm sure that the outcomes of this project is going to have a very positive impact on the development of inclusive education in all the countries that participated in the consortium. It's also very important that all the information and data will be posted on the websites of the Ministry of Education of all the 5 countries and will become available and accessible to the communities of parents, teachers, special teachers, and other stakeholders. It was great to get to know all the wonderful people, colleagues from all these countries to create a network for further sharing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, Moldova team. And now the floor is yours, Eureka. And I think that your partners will have an input as well. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm really glad to have been part of this project. Welcome to this symposium. So, from Moldova, we have here our colleagues from NGOs, from governmental services that ensure child's rights to education. Next slide, please. In my presentation, I would like to draw your attention to 3 major issues. And I want to mention that as part of the project, we once again tried to carry out some self-assessment and comparative analysis of inclusive education of special needs children at different schooling levels.
Изучали опыта стран консорциума и по реализации политик и практик, а также
We also learned from the experience of the consortium countries in implementing inclusive education policies and practices, and we could see really wonderful practices during the project. So what have we done in Moldova so far? Next slide, please. So what have been our achievements in terms of inclusive education? National inclusive education policies in Moldova are harmonized with the policies of Europe and global policies. In 2010, Moldova ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We included inclusive education in the Code on Education of Moldova that was developed back in 2014, and later in 2023 the code was updated, addressing specifically the category of children with severe disabilities. Also, we have an inclusive education program in Moldova, and we actually implemented the first stage of the program between years 2011 to 2020, and for starting from this year, we're launching the second stage of the program that clearly states that we need to offer services to children with severe disabilities. Also, in this context, we are planning to develop special education services and implement policies in order to achieve SDG 4 to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all. Next slide, please. So I would say that apart from policies, we have been successful in implementing reforms as well, because we can see really great cooperation between different ministries and stakeholders with the Ministry of Education and Science taking the lead, and we can see also great cooperation with international partners. We have a coordination council that includes representatives of all stakeholder organizations. In Moldova, we have inclusive education services at the national level, at the district level, and these are the services that provide psychological and pedagogical assistance and support. And at the school level, as well as the level of kindergartens, we have multidisciplinary commissions and resource centers that provide additional services. So we have 1,000 resource centers across the country and about 2,000 tutors. Today, we in Moldova understand that in order to implement the program that we have launched this year, we need to offer more comprehensive or even more specific services to children with disabilities. And it was great to see successful practices that our colleagues are implementing. And we just want to see an increase in the number of children with disabilities attending public, mainstream public schools. In 2010, we had about 12,000 children that were enrolled in specialized boarding schools. But today, only 500 children are still attending the specialized schools, and all the others go to ordinary mainstream schools. We could see really great practice of Georgia in providing assistance and support to children with visual impairments. And we're also planning to continue working with our Georgian counterparts and implementing their experience of working with visually impaired and blind children. And next slide, please. Also, university curricula should be implemented in the country, following the example of Georgia, with a special training course for specialists working with children who are visually impaired or blind, deaf or hard of hearing. So this new curriculum should be added to the existing curricula, university curricula. Also, social inclusion is very important.
Дидактических материалов увидели в Узбекистане.
Also, when we visited Uzbekistan, we got to know really brilliant didactic materials that we would like to also have in Moldova.
Я заканчиваю. В этом смысле Узбекистан имеет хорошие, красивые...
And Uzbekistan has really very good creative laboratories. And in conclusion, I would like to share some recommendations for the future. We would like to discuss the opportunities for creating accessible and regularly updated databases for the consortium countries. As Farida mentioned previously, we have already created 3 databases. Thank you for attention, and if you have any questions, I'll be ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viorica.
Viorica,
You shared very
interesting
useful experience.
indeed.
And thank you
Thanks
to all of
the
those in
participants. We
the
have a lot
chat
of
who are so
questions
active
and
in
comments in
discussion
the chat.
and asking questions. I'd like to bring up one question that
And
has
there
been
is
asked
one
already because
question
it's a very relevant
that we
comment
could
and
address
question.
right
Do
now.
all
The question is,
schools in Georgia
do
have
all
a
the schools in Georgia
bathroom and
have
a
restrooms and
resource room
resource
in
rooms?
Georgia?
So the
Okay.
question is
So
to
this was a
Georgia.
question for Georgia. Could we
So
turn
can you
on the
please
microphone for
unmute
our
our
Georgian colleagues?
colleagues
Can they
from
answer
Georgia?
this question?
We have double interpretation now to English. So you are both talking. I was checking if it was the presenter, but you are both talking. So either Richard or Victoria, if you want to take the lead, because we are both talking now.
Sorry.
I will continue. So, is our Georgian representative in the chat? Can we answer the question? We don't see Guna in the participant list. Maybe she had some technical issues. So maybe we can move to the next question. Or if Guna is in the room, please raise your hand. We don't see her yet. So are there any other colleagues in Georgia who know how to answer that question? If so, raise your hand. Ah, okay. We see Farida has raised her hand. Ah, I see. It's Guna instead of Farida. Yes. And yes, I'm here. What's your question? We had a question about Georgia. Do all Georgian schools have a resource room and a bathroom, a washroom? Thank you for the question. We have representatives of the ministry that I would like to ask to turn on her microphone and address the room and answer the question. Please raise your hand, Tamara. So we have 106 people in our chat room. So raise your hand swiftly, please, so that we can give you the floor. We don't see Tamara right now, unfortunately. Okay. Guna, maybe you can answer for her. Okay, we just had agreed amongst ourselves that she would answer. Okay, as I said, okay, now I see. Tamar is with us. Maybe you can answer. Not the right Tamar, not the Tamar I meant, but we have a second Tamar who works with us. Maybe you can answer.
Actually is here, and I will turn her just a minute. Excuse me. Sorry. Yes.
Приветствую всех. Извините, у меня
Welcome, everyone. I apologize. I had a technical issue that came up, and I had to switch to Tamar's computer. So I heard the question about washrooms and resource rooms. Yes. So resource rooms are present in all schools that have children with special needs. As for washrooms, we have adapted washrooms, bathrooms in all schools where special needs children are studying. Thank you very much to our Georgian colleagues. And we'd like to move to another question from the chat room. What practices have been examined from Tajikistan in the area of inclusive education? And to answer this question, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Sabaha from the Association of Children with Special Needs. Sabahat, are you with us? Sabahat, please turn on your microphone and camera. Okay, I don't seem to see Sabahat in the chat list. Am I correct? We see Sabahat, but perhaps due to technical issues, she can't hear us because neither her microphone nor her camera is turned on. Okay, then I would propose trying to reach Sabahat by phone, for example, and move on to the next presentation in order to not lose time. So, Veronica, can we move to the next presentation in the program? Is that okay? Yes, of course. So let's move on to Uzbekistan. So the team from the Republic of Uzbekistan was the host for one of the visits and was also a very active participant in the project. So I'd like to give the floor to Tatiana, Alliance, Central Asian Alliance on Inclusive Education. Tatiana, the floor is yours, and you have 8 minutes. Yes, I'd like to welcome all of the participants here at this international symposium. I would like to present today the experience and report of Uzbekistan. Under the leadership of our president, and based on the decrees and the presidential decree and cabinet of ministries decision on approval of normative legal acts concerning the education of children with special education needs, specify the goals and objectives of inclusive education today. The first steps towards inclusive education that have legal force began being made in 2021. According to the government decision, the Ministry of Preschool and School Education has opened a inclusive education laboratory at the Republican Center for Psychological, Pedagogical, and Vocational Guidance. And this laboratory comprehensively explores all issues related to inclusive education. During the study visit, participants visited the laboratory, and participants who don't have this type of institute in their country decided to open one themselves. According to the latest data, there are more than 1,000 schools that offer inclusive education in the country, while the number of kindergartens is much smaller. Starting this year, some international projects have also been launched. One of them will be operating in Uzbekistan for 5 years, focusing on 2 select regions. And a third region is planned to be included as well. I'll say more about this in a few minutes. Currently, in the Republic of Uzbekistan, there are 86 specialized schools and boarding schools for children with physical or mental developmental disabilities. And in these schools, there are 21,200 students. We also have 21 sanatorium-type boarding schools where 6,100 children are studying. 13,300 students who need long-term treatment are taught at home on an individual basis. NGOs are actively involved in inclusive education together with governmental institutions. And many of these NGOs were visited by the program participants during their visit. Throughout its entire period of independence, Uzbekistan has issued laws, decrees, and resolutions, and has paid particular attention to the advancement and improvements of the life of children with special needs. Next slide, please. As for the methodological support for CWD education, this support is based on the national program of Uzbekistan. Instruction is conducted based on mainstream school programs and textbooks. And for teachers of inclusive classes, methodological guides have been developed with lesson plans for individualized and corrective teaching. Here, I should point out that these teachers, future teachers, are trained in a single special center where they gain the skills they need. So schools have special conditions and methods for conducting corrective classes for children with all types of disabilities. In primary corrective classes, children with disabilities learn according to adaptive programs of specialized schools, and special textbooks on general subjects and corrective subjects have been developed for them. An excellent model of cooperation between governmental and non-governmental organizations in supporting inclusive education has been studied in Georgia and is being developed in Uzbekistan now. In cooperation with the Ministry of Preschool and School Education, and together with national schools and respective Georgian models, similar approaches towards inclusive education have been developed involving representatives from the Senate, Ministry of Preschool and School Education, the Tashkis Republican Center for Professional Guidance and Psychological and Pedagogical Diagnosis, and there are mainstream and specialized schools for children with disabilities. The high level of promotion of special education needs in Georgia show important results that lead to both higher public awareness and show the need for more participation in the implementation process. But after the study tour to Georgia, it was decided to develop programs, teaching, and methodological literature on inclusion for specialists, parents, and children in preschool institutions. The decision was made to develop modular programs and conduct TOTs for preschool and school inclusive education for university students and as part of professional development courses. We decided also to organize inclusion schools for CWD parents in communities, increase the competence of inclusive class teachers for using appropriate individualized approaches in teaching, raise awareness of the population to improve full coverage of children with disabilities, and establish a international research team and build further cooperation. Here I've made a comparative table that I won't have time to discuss. You can look at it later. On this slide, I wanted to share a bit about a bit of information that's funded by USAID for 5 years with the support of the government of Uzbekistan and the Ministry of Education. Next slide, please. So, project outcomes. The experience of the consortium countries in implementing inclusive education policies and successful pedagogical practices for teaching children with disabilities in mainstream schools. Also, university programs for inclusive education teachers were developed. A comparative analysis of methods and approaches was conducted to learn more about educating children with disabilities in primary schools and the barriers they face in the consortium countries to better plan and implement these policies. We also learn more about improving and expanding inclusive education practices for all children, disseminating good practices, and scaling up successful practices. Thank you very much for your attention. We're very happy that our experience could be studied by the other countries in the consortium. I'd like to say thank you to our friends in Geneva who gave us the chance to share our experience, and I hope that this practice will continue going forward.
Well,
colleagues, we have one more presentation pending, and I hope that the team from Tajikistan is ready to present. Sabahat, are you with us? If you're ready, you have 8 minutes.
Замечательно, Сабахат, пожалуйста.
Great,
включите
Sabahat,
микрофон.
please unmute yourself.
Меня слышно?
Can you hear
Да,
me?
вас замечательно
Yes,
слышно,
we can
и
hear
мы
you clear
начинаем
and
нашу
sound.
презентацию. У вас
And
8 минут.
please start your presentation. You have
Спасибо
8
большое.
minutes.
Добрый
Thank
день.
you so
Приношу извинения за
much. Good
технические
day. I'm
неполадки. Хочу
sorry for the
поприветствовать всех
technical
участников
problems.
симпозиума.
I would like to welcome
Основной фундамент
and say hello to
инклюзивного
all the
образования
symposium
в Таджикистане создан.
participants.
Институт ратифицировал все
We
основные
have
международные
laid
документы
the
по правам
basic framework
человека.
for inclusive
Среди них Конвенция
education
по правам
in
ребенка,
Tajikistan.
Международный пакт
Tajikistan
об
has
экономических,
ratified
социальных
7
и
core and
культурных
international
правах
human
и
rights
Комитет по
instruments,
ликвидации
including
дискриминации в
CRC,
отношении женщин.
ICS,
Данные документы
CRC, and
утверждаются в
CEDAW.
Органе право на образование КАР.
These
В
documents
2018
play
году
focus on the right
Таджикистан
to
подписал
education for
Конвенцию
all.
о
In
правах
2018,
инвалидов.
Tajikistan
В
signed the UN
2013
Convention
году в Таджикистане
on
были
the rights
проведены
of
законодательные
persons with
реформы в сфере
disabilities.
образования.
In
И приняты
2013,
новые законы
Tajikistan carried
об
out
образовании,
legislative
о дошкольном
reforms in
обучении и
education
воспитании
and
детей.
adopted
В
some new laws,
2015 году был
specifically
принят
on
закон о защите
education
прав
and on
ребенка,
preschool
в котором введено
education and
специальное
bringing of
образование детей с
children. In
инвалидностью.
2015,
В сентябре
Tajikistan
2020
adopted the
года
law on the
правительство
protection of the rights
приняло
of the
национальную
child.
стратегию
In
развития
September
образования
2020, the
до
government
2030
adopted the
года,
National Education
где
Development
основной
Strategy
долгосрочной
until
целью определено
2030,
создание эффективности системы образования,
identifying creation and efficient education
способствующей
system as one of the
доступу к равным
priorities
возможностям всех
to
детей.
offer access to schools for all children.
Также разработан проект Кодекса об образовании. При
Also,
Министерстве образования и
Tajikistan
науки функционирует
developed
рабочая группа
a
по
draft
инклюзивному
code on
образованию, которая
education.
работает над
We have a
стратегическим
special
планированием
working group
развития детейного
for
образования
inclusive
в стране.
education, dealing
Также
with
создан
strategic
Национальный
planning
комитет
of
проекта
inclusive
КИКС,
education in
который
the
вошли
country.
представители
Also, we have the
Министерства
National
образования и
KIX
науки
Committee,
Республики
including
и общественных
people from the
организаций,
Ministry of
работающих в области
Education and
инклюзивного
Science,
образования.
as well as public
Комитет будет
organizations
координировать
and
проекты
NGOs
и
working in the field of
определять приоритетные
education.
направления
This
реформ
group
в
is
секторе
going
образования.
to coordinate projects and
В
identify
2017
priorities
году
for
Министерством
reforms in
образования и науки
education.
Республики
In
Таджикистан по поддержке
2017, the
ЮНИСЕФ
Ministry of
в стране был
Education and
создан
Science of
49
Tajikistan,
ресурсных центров. При
supported by UNICEF, established
общеобразовательных школах для
48 resource
методического
centers
сопровождения и
at
поддержки
mainstream
детей с
public
особыми
schools in the
образовательными
country to
потребностями
provide
в процессе
methodological
обучения
support
и
and
адаптации в
guidance to
общеобразовательных
children
школах.
with special
Как поддержку
education
правительства
needs in the
Японии,
process of
Институт
learning
открытого общества
and
ООН здесь, в
adapting to
Таджикистане,
mainstream public
Общественная
schools.
организация
With the
родителей детей с
support of the
ограниченными
government of
возможностями
Japan
в
and
стране были
OSAIF,
созданы
20
20
resource
ресурсных классов.
classes were established in
Мы очень
Tajikistan.
рады, что в
We are
рамках
really
проекта
happy to
международного обмена
mention
KIX
that
EMAP по инклюзивному
under the
образованию в
KIX
Европе и
EMAP
Центральной
project
Азии
and
нам предоставилась
intercountry
возможность
exchange,
познакомиться
we
с
had
методами
an
и подходами
opportunity
обучения
to
детей
get
с
to
особыми
know the
образовательными
methods and
потребностями в
approaches
начальных классах.
to educating
Изучить успешные
children with
практики в
special
роли Узбекистана в
educational
продвижении инклюзивного
needs
образования.
in Georgia
Опыт
and in
стран-консорциумов по
Uzbekistan,
реализации политики
and get to know the
инклюзивного
experience
образования.
of all
Успешные
consortium
педагогические практики
countries
обучения
in
детей
drafting
с
and
инвалидностью
implementing
в
inclusive
общеобразовательных
education
школах.
policies.
Также мы
And
ознакомились с
the
опытом
practices
сотрудничества
for
Министерства
adaptation
образования
of
и
special
науки
needs
и
children
организации
to
родителей
the
детей с
conditions of
инвалидностью,
mainstream
людей
schools.
с инвалидностью в
We
сфере
met
обеспечения доступа детей с особыми
organizations working
образовательными
in this
потребностями
field,
в
also
образовательном
parents of
пространстве.
children with special educational
Обмен
needs, as
знаниями
well as
из
specialists
опыта Грузии. Мы
responsible
познакомились с работой
for
мультидисциплинарной командой,
inclusive education in
сотрудничеством
mainstream
педагогов,
schools. So
психиатров,
we got to
психологов,
know the
педагогов,
multidisciplinary
с
team
опытом
in
типа способ
Georgia,
прохождения в
and
общеобразовательных школах, работой
we
в специализированных
got to
школах,
know
работой в
the
группах
specialists
подготовки
who
будущих
provide
учителей,
tutors,
работой с
support,
детьми с инвалидностью.
as
Также
special
с опытом
assistants
работы в
to
Коалиции организаций
children with
родителей детей с
disabilities in
инвалидностью
mainstream
и
schools. We met
самих людей с
people from the
инвалидностью в движении
coalition of
инклюзивного
parents
образования.
of
Очень
children
был
with
интересен опыт
disabilities.
Узбекистана. Мы познакомились с
Also, Uzbek
учебно-методическими материалами
experience
по
was
работе с
very
детьми
interesting
с особыми
because we
образовательными
got
потребностями.
to know
Сегодня инклюзивная
methodological
школа в процессе
materials
адаптации таких
for
детей к школьной
special
среде
inclusive
с опытом по
education,
адаптации образовательных
the
материалов по
experience in
детей с
adapting
особыми
educational
образовательными
materials
потребностями.
for
Также
children
с
with
опытом работы
special needs,
педагогов с такими детьми
experience
в
of teachers
общеобразовательных
working
школах
with
и с работой Республиканского
children with
центра
disabilities in
профессиональной
mainstream
ориентации
schools.
психолого-педагогической
And we
диагностики
got to know the
учащихся.
work of the
На
Republican
этапе
Center for
реализации
Professional
инклюзивного
Guidance and
образования возникает
Pedagogical Diagnostics
острая
of
необходимость
students.
проведения серьезных исследований, которые смогут дать информацию о процессе, результатах, качественных
And we
изменений
know that
и
we need
повлиять на
very
общее
serious
восприятие и
research
возможности и эффективность
to achieve the data that would help us plan better for inclusive education. getting to
полезным
know
подходом к
successful
обучению детей с
practices of
инвалидностью
Georgia and
начальных классов
Uzbekistan
можно заимствовать в продвижении инклюзивного
in
образования в нашей стране.
managing the educational
Конечно же,
process of children
от
with
проекта
disabilities
мы
in
ожидаем
elementary
продолжения
schools
сотрудничества стран
is very
консорциума для
useful to us,
дальнейшего
and we
обмена
would like
странами
to
в области
implement
инклюзивного
some of the
образования.
practices in
Обмен в
our
атмосфере
country.
продвижения инклюзивного
We
образования с
would like
организациями
also to continue
родителей
the
детей с
exchange of
инвалидностью стран-партнеров для
experience
того, чтобы
with
ребенок с
the
инвалидностью был
parents of
максимально
children
вовлечен
with
в
special
образовательное
needs, so
пространство.
that
Очень важна
we
работа
could together
мультидисциплинарной команды.
involve the
И
children in
нам
the
необходимо
educational
более детально
program.
изучить работу данной
Also,
команды,
we need
документы, с
to
которыми они
study in
работают,
more
материалы,
detail
на
the
которые опираются при
work of
составлении адаптивной
multidisciplinary
программы и
teams,
индивидуального плана. Также
the
нам очень
materials
интересно
they are
ознакомиться с опытом
using
внедрения
for
тьюторства и
creating
менторского
and
сопровождения детей с
adapting
особыми образовательными
the
потребностями в
teaching
среде основными
plans.
этапами тьюторского сопровождения в образовательной
We
среде.
also want to get to
Что
know
касается
the
материалов стран
tutors
консорциума, то,
support
конечно же, нам очень
in
интересны
mainstream
адаптивные
schools.
программы, да,
Also,
познакомиться с индивидуальным планом.
we would like
Очень
to
интересны
get
curriculum
to know
для
better the
незрячих и
adaptive
глухих детей в
programs,
сфере инклюзивного
individual
образования.
plans,
Изучить
the
программы вузов по
curricula
подготовке
for
будущих
blind
учителей,
and
работающих с
deaf
детьми с особыми
children.
образовательными потребностями.
Also, it's
Познакомиться с
important to
материалами по
know what kind
подготовке
of
кадров,
programs are used
педагоги
by
тренируют
universities
специальных
to train
педагогов в области
special
инклюзивного
needs
образования. Изучить
teachers.
опыт специализированных школ.
And
Очень было
it's important
интересно видеть, что
to
дети
know the
приходят
experience of
с
so-called
тяжелой сочетанной формой
specialized
инвалидности.
schools.
Здесь идет речь
We
только
could
о
see
таких
a
детях.
lot of
Они
children with
получают знания
very
в течение дня,
severe
а вечером
disabilities
ребенок
coming to
возвращается в
specialized
семью, и это
schools.
замечательно.
These
Конечно, для
schools
нас
are
также
actually
интересны программы для
daycare
детей с
centers.
аутизмом,
They
с
are not
сенсорными
boarding
нарушениями,
schools
с
because
умственными
after the
нарушениями. И
day,
опыт психолога,
after the
педагогического
classes during the
сопровождения
day, children
обучающихся
get
с
back to their
особыми
families,
образовательными
which is very
потребностями.
important.
Примерами
And
адаптации
we would
методов,
like to
примеры
know better the
технологий
experience of
обучения воспитания.
psychological
Благодарю.
support
Одна минуточка. Все,
offered to
5 минут.
students with special
Вы
needs.
прямо
That's
уложились
it.
вовремя. Спасибо
Thank you.
большое,
Yes,
Сабахат.
Sabahat. Thank
На
you
самом
for
деле, коллеги,
keeping
очень,
your
я хочу сказать,
time.
что вдохновляющая
And
презентация. И
I
здесь
think
у
this
нас
is
сейчас
really an inspiring
возможность, в
presentation.
принципе,
And
задать
now we
вопросы,
have an opportunity
побеседовать
to
со всеми
ask
нашими коллегами,
questions
со
to
всеми
all the
замечательными
presenters,
участниками
to all the country
этого
representatives,
доброго проекта.
the great
И
participants
если
of
вы
this
будете хотеть зачитывать наши
very
вопросы в
kind
чате, то
project, I would
одним из
say.
первых вопросов
And
был, и это был, я думаю, что
one of the
смогут
first
ответить
questions that
абсолютно все,
we received in the chat, and I think
это
this is a
участники
question
из
that
Украины. Он
goes
спрашивал,
to
а вообще
all the
рассматривал ли проект
speakers.
и
This is a
команда
question from our
аспекты повышения
participant
устойчивости
from
инклюзивного образования в
Ukraine.
экстремальных
And
условиях?
the
Пока
question
все
is,
думают,
have you
скорее, кто
ever
будет отвечать,
discussed
я
inclusive
хочу еще раз
education
поблагодарить всех наших
aspects
спикеров
in
за
emergencies?
вдохновляющие выступления и за
And
тот труд, который вы сделали в
meanwhile, I
рамках
want to
проекта
thank all
за
our
очень короткое
speakers
время
for
смогли
your
вдохновить и
presentations,
себя,
for
и
the
свои
great work you have
правительства,
done
и
as
свои
part of the
министерства
project, because you have
сделать как
managed to
можно больше
inspire
для того, чтобы никто
your
не остался
colleagues, the
позади. Итак,
ministries,
пожалуйста, мы сейчас
your
открываем очень
counterparts,
короткую
and
сессию
you are
вопросов и
doing
ответов.
your best
И
so that
первый
nobody
вопрос
would
был как раз-таки
be left
аспекты повышения
behind in
устойчивости инклюзивного
education.
образования в
So,
экстремальных условиях.
again, back
Коллеги,
to the
может быть,
question
кто-то из вас
about the
может ответить на
sustainability of
этот вопрос.
inclusive education in emergencies.
Да,
Colleagues, who would
пожалуйста,
like to answer
Татьяна,
this
и
question?
мы
Tatiana,
не забываем
please.
про время, да, мы очень просим вас
And
уложиться в
please,
минуту-полторы.
don't
Спасибо
forget
большое.
the timing. Yes, I think the question was from Ukraine,
Ну,
right?
давайте я сейчас вернусь. Вы пока
What's the
отвечайте,
name
я вам скажу.
of the Ukrainian participant? You can start responding. You know, studying inclusive education in emergencies was not our purpose, but I can tell you that in Uzbekistan, we have a state service, state emergency service, and they have a great trainer, great expert, and she has recently conducted trainings about educational in emergencies. And I think that her experience really counts years. And if necessary, we could offer offline or online trainings by her.
И я думаю,
Yes, the question was from Sergey Londer from Ukraine. And Tatiana, you can contact Sergey directly. His contacts are in the chat. And one more question. Isal Tussar says in the chat that inclusive education should be an integral part of the overall state educational policy. So people involved in inclusive education should realize that inclusive education should not be isolated from the overall mainstream education programs. So everyone should have equal, equitable right to education. And it's very important to collect and disseminate evidence. I think it's more of a comment rather than a question. And another participant says that inclusive education implies a whole set of policies and practices. And Janil Bukombaeva is asking, how can we apply such a comprehensive approach? What should be done to ensure comprehensive approach to policies and practices, and how a favorable ecosystem for inclusive education could be created using the comprehensive approach? Who would answer? Please raise your hand and we will unmute you. Colleagues, well, I would respond if I may. So I can say that our coordinators from Geneva really very well planned for the project. And I think that the involvement of both governmental and non-governmental organizations was a great idea. And if we speak for Uzbekistan, as you could see and hear from my presentation, the president of Uzbekistan, the governmental organizations, as well as NGOs, work in really close cooperation with one another. And you remember I mentioned an USAID funded project that is planned for 5 years. And this is a project to expand and roll out the inclusive education initiatives involving governmental as well as non-governmental actors. And as you could see from all the presentations, our project has had a very strong positive impact as well. And I think the people who have participated in this project from the countries are the real leaders in their countries, and they have invested so much into this project. Well, then our next study tour it will be to Uzbekistan as well. But now speaking seriously, I think that involvement of international partners is very frequently a prerequisite to ensure a comprehensive approach, because it helps combine different actors from the country. And I think that at the level of basic, elementary, and secondary education, we need to remember to mind the inclusive education principles. Yes, indeed. And we really need very strong cooperation between different actors. Okay, thank you. One more question in the chat. It's very important, the participant says, to ensure financial sustainability. so that all the ideas and initiatives that start as part of projects would be sustained further on. And we need to think what can be done on a regular basis to support children with disabilities as they go through the process of education. Okay, I can see Farida has raised her hand. Please, Farida. Yes, thank you so much. This is a brilliant question, an important question, the question of funding. But initially, when the project started, and that was a short-term project comparatively, and we did not include financial sustainability as part of the project. We focus more on the educational component for children with disabilities. I do hope that in the future we would have more projects, more initiatives that would enable us to study deeper into the issue of sustainability, financial sustainability, as part of the consortium or KIX EMAP initiatives. Thank you. Thank you, Farida. I can see that Guna has raised her hand. Please, Georgia. Guna? Oh, well. Oh, sorry, Anara. I could see you raised your hand. Anara Nadirbekova.
В общем, замечательный вопрос. Он
Yes,
крайне актуальный.
really a
Хочу
great
отметить, что
question,
бесчисленное
an
финансирование
important
инклюзивного
one.
образования
Indeed,
может позволить нам говорить об устойчивости наших инициативах.
of
Но
course, only if
тут надо
funding is
рассматривать и
provided
проводить
to
работу
inclusive
параллельно.
education, we could
Нужно
speak
готовить
about the
специалистов,
sustainability
нужно
of our initiatives.
создавать
But
инфраструктуру.
also another
И что мы
important
сделаем,
issue
да,
is
что специалисты
training
во
of
многом
the specialists and
сейчас
creating
работают на
infrastructure.
энтузиазме и
Today, we can
мотивированы
see a lot of enthusiastic
повышать свою
people
квалификацию в области
uh,
инклюзивного
who
образования.
are not
И
financially
они
motivated.
по роду
Their
своей деятельности,
motivation
они
is to
ориентированы на определенный
improve their
социальный результат.
competencies in inclusive
Но со стороны
education
Министерства
and to
образования
achieve
говоря,
certain
мы изучили
social
опыт таких
results.
стран, и мы видим, что
But
с каждым годом
from
их интерес
the
к развитию и
experience
поддержке инклюзивного образования
of other
растет.
countries, we
Во-первых,
can
это
see that
как
ministries of
сказать, запрос
education
современных
tend to show
граждан, потому
more
что
and more attention
экология,
to
процессы,
inclusive
ситуация
education.
с экологией в нашем
Partially,
мире
this is because of the
подвергает
overall
факту
global
того, что
situation.
статистика по рождаемости детей с
We can
инвалидностью
see that
неизменно растет.
because of the
И в
global
связи с этим
environmental changes,
образовательные
the
услуги и
planet
все
is
правительства, они должны
seeing
быть
more
готовы
and
к
more
приему
children
детей
with
с особыми
disabilities
образовательными
today.
потребностями.
So
Вопрос
that's why
высокий. Я хочу
the
задать
ministries play, the ministries put a lot of focus on inclusive education today in many countries. And I think that we need to address several issues at a time in countries. So, Viorica and Aurica wanted to say something as they mentioned in the chat. Yes, my name is Aurelia Nuka. I represent the psychological and pedagogical support service from the Lyovsk region in Moldova. And in Moldova, at the level of kindergartens and mainstream schools, we have special regulations approved by the Ministry of Education, according to which teachers and educators are to receive some extra pay for working with special needs children. So, because this is actually an extra specific work for the teachers to work with special needs children. And also in Moldova, we have the National Fund for Inclusive Education, and I mentioned before that teachers and educators in kindergartens and mainstream schools get an extra pay for working with special needs children. And from this national fund, they pay to special teachers, specialized teachers working with children with disabilities. Thank you so much. As a moderator, I would like to remind all the participants that we have one more presentation pending by Ekaterina. But I can see two raised hands from Sergey Londer and Aina Khan. So the floor is now yours, Sergey, and then Aina Khan.
Thank you very much, dear participants. This is a very important subject. I'd like to draw attention to the question that I want to talk about gaining equal opportunities, equal access to schools for special needs children. This needs to be in the focus of our attention. And now, Ukrainian children, of course, are in very extreme conditions, and children with special needs are in a disadvantaged situation. The general situation, this is a general situation, as we know, there are climate changes, epidemiological changes. For example, our children who travel abroad, who move abroad, often experience a language barrier as well. And this highlights the importance of broadening the scope of this research and include these aspects as well, because they are of a general nature for all countries. Thank you very much, Sergey. And as Julia said at the very beginning, we should think of this program, this project, not as the end, but as the beginning. And you have raised one of the challenges to keep in mind for the future development. We have a representative, a participant here from Somali, who also wanted to share some experience. We're going to have time at the end of the session for some more words. And I want to say that I want to end here with words that inclusive education starts with people and their willingness to talk about inclusive education. And we have a wonderful team here, and we're going to hear first now from Ekaterina Dunayev, who will present her comparative analysis of inclusive education practices in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Moldova, Kyrgyzstan, and Georgia. Yekaterina Dunyayeva is a research fellow at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and associate professor at the Institute of International Studies and Political Science. I give the floor to you. Thank you. I would like to share with you the main interesting conclusions I was able to make as part of my comparative analysis. Today, it is critically important to study the development of inclusive education. We can see that inclusive education is being actively implemented in all countries of the world, of this group. In recent years, many laws and legal norms have been passed related to inclusive education. And the analysis showed that the traditions and development of inclusive education vary across the countries surveyed. For example, in Uzbekistan, debate on inclusive education began in the 1930s. in Tajikistan, this concept only appeared relatively recently. The state, of course, is the key stakeholder because they sign international agreements and provide for legislation in the area of inclusive education. However, civil society and NGOs play a very important role in encouraging and developing inclusive education. Also, international norms, international agreements and instruments have become an important part of the picture. They promote the adoption of proper national laws, norms and practices. We have, for example, the UN Convention on the Rights of Children and other documents. Tajikistan is the only country where in 2018, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities was passed. Also, in the countries studied, there are specific stakeholders. For example, Moldova has a special multi-profile school commission involving representatives of different education structures who conduct monitoring and evaluation of inclusive education processes. In Kyrgyzstan, there are special supervisors who take part in providing for policy and support in special needs education. Georgia has a special center in this way, and in Tajikistan, one of the special stakeholders is so there's a special body for that. And I want to point out also that after analyzing the practices in inclusive education in these countries, key changes were made thanks to joint projects. International sponsors and organizations initiated these programs and stimulated local governments to develop the necessary legislature and changes. And we can see here that NGOs are a key mechanism for providing for interactions and cooperation between key stakeholders within the country. Next slide, please. Developing tolerance in inclusive education is a key aspect, and we need to look at the experience in Georgia of how raising awareness has led to an expansion of the application of definition and application of inclusive education. For example, at early stages of inclusive education, and originally this meant only children with disabilities, but gradually the definition broadened and it began to be used also towards children with special needs. And this was reflected in various state and official documents. There are disagreements in each country regarding the policy and practice of inclusive education. And I'd like to present I'd like to mention a report that was published in 2022, funded by the Soros Foundation, and showed that special needs children are not a monolithic group. They're not a homogeneous group. And some parents don't want their special needs children to study in normal schools, partly because of a lack of effective mechanisms for inclusive education, including a insufficient state budget in this area, which means that there are too many children per teacher, and this is especially true in certain regions of the country. So we see negative problems such as people's negative attitudes, a lack of access, and lack of resources. And so much is needed to realize the principles of inclusive education in practice. The experience of these countries show that a comprehensive approach is needed that includes, that helps to implement practice. And Moldova has a very good system for implementing these practices in the country. First of all, there's a methodology for identifying children, identifying their family and community of friends, how to include the children in the inclusive education process, and how to monitor their performance. There's also a system for professional development and training and retraining of instructors who work with educators who work with special needs children. And each of the countries we studied encounters difficulties in their attempts to reform and improve teacher training systems. Many teachers still have difficulty. They don't know much about how to properly work with special needs children. And many of these instructors and educators lack the materials they need to work with these children. And without training, without providing systems for these educators to work effectively, we cannot receive the results we would like. Uzbekistan, for example, has published a handbook to help develop individual curriculum plans for special needs children. And the national plans of each country highlight the importance of developing materials and recommendations for children to improve the quality of home training for these children. I'd like to point out in conclusion that some things are lacking in the system we observe. First of all, we see a lack of bottom-up grassroots movements to develop materials, monitor, and evaluate the processes. We need to see participants and stakeholders showing initiative themselves. And we need to see their ideas being spread and gaining resonance among their colleagues. All countries need to put more emphasis, in particular, on involving the parents of children with special needs. And for this, we need more support of the parents to involve them more in the education process, which will improve their understanding and improve the effectiveness of the inclusive education in these countries in general. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Yekaterina. I think your talk has answered many of the questions we saw in the chat box. Many questions here are about new approaches to inclusive education, and your comparative analysis answered several of these questions. For example, the chat, someone asked in the chat about how the project views working with parents. And you said right now that working with parents is a key part of developing inclusive education, because involving parents in the process is particularly important. And I think that our colleagues from the project might have something to share. For example, if you have some very effective methodologies and good practices you'd like to share, we have a place for that, and we're open to learning from each other. Are there any questions and comments for Yekaterina? If not, we'll continue. We'll continue sharing questions from the chat. Yekaterina, then we'll move on to the broader comments and questions, and you can chime in anytime you want to give your opinion. Okay, so looking at the chat, we see several comments and several questions. I would like to propose answering the questions that have been posed, and then we can hear the brief comments. I'd like to remind all of you that our time is drawing to a close. Actually, it's supposed to be over already, but we can take a little bit of time to continue to finalize our comments and questions. So there's a question about the inclusion laboratory. Is this an independent body or a state body? How is it funded? And does the laboratory cover preschool education? So who can answer this question? I think this is an important question to discuss. Anara, yes, please. Very good question. Yes, we have these laboratories in our country and in Uzbekistan. And in our country, we have financial support from international organizations and created a single laboratory. Now the laboratories are operating at universities and help to enrich the education of inclusive education specialists. We continue to obtain some funding from international organizations, and we're working towards sustainability. Thank you very much. Tatiana and Gulnara, I saw you raise your hands as well. 30 seconds, please. So, in our country, Uzbekistan also is part of the structure of the Ministry of School and Preschool Education. They have not developed any special handbooks, but they plan to be developed. The materials come from the ministry. They develop these materials and conduct workshops, meet with people, and conduct business trips. That's the type of work being done. Gulnara, is it an independent organization, state organization, and does it cover preschool education? Gulnara, we can't hear you. Please turn on your microphone. Unfortunately, Tamara, who is in charge for preschool education, had to leave the meeting, and I will have to answer for her. So right now, we have a very interesting process and reform going on covering preschool education. And the process is what we call self-assessment. So the preschool facilities, kindergartens themselves are assessing themselves, and our legislature, as I mentioned in my presentation, is fully harmonized with the EU. UNICEF is working with us as well. And so what is this self-assessment process? The kindergartens themselves are conducting a self-assessment to find out what level of development they are currently at. As for inclusive development programs, what's interesting to note is that the Ministry of Health is funding a special program for preschool development. And this program is for children with any type of impairment or impairment. It's called Every Child Intervention. Maybe our interpreters can help to translate that, but we have special specialists who visit kindergartens and help the educators there work with these children. Thank you very much, Gulnara. We are out of time. So I understood that funding comes from the state budget and also from development partners. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We have many comments in the chat box that mention, for example, that curriculum needs to be both effective and inclusive. There need to be protections against alienation. There needs to be work done with parents. Also, profile organizations and subject matter experts need to be involved, for example, sign language experts and so forth. So it's very important to work together and build a network and create new platforms and use existing platforms to work more and more effectively together and solve the issues facing our children. So I would like to think together for a moment about this long-term collaboration and information exchange, information and experience exchange in the area of inclusive education. What can we do to facilitate this exchange? There are different methods available. It's important, as we heard, for there to be a comprehensive approach, for there to be interaction between specialists and experts and practitioners and so forth. So I'd like to give the floor first to Mr. Adam Mohammed. I would like to give you a minute and a half, please. And could you please mention talk about these 3 points, establishing long-term collaborations to facilitate exchange in the area of inclusive education, how to facilitate the exchange of best practices, and how to involve all the necessary stakeholders in this process. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Да, давайте, пожалуйста. Слушаем вас, Адам.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Adam, the National Coalition Coordinator of Somalia. Our coalition name is Education for All Somalia, working with GBE and Oxfam Denmark and implementing education outlet program in Somalia. For the last 4 years, we have been advocating the right to education for children with disability and gender and inclusion. What we have experienced in the past 4 years in Somalia, level of collaboration in support of children with disabilities is very low, and specifically when it comes to education emergencies, the whole support goes to the other sectors rather than education sector. And specifically last, let me take an example of last year's fund request from the United Nations agencies, UN OCHA, under the program is called Somali Humanitarian Fund, SHF. They have requested $105 million, and they secured funding for only $18 million. And this 18 million went directly to the teachers' incentives and support of the teaching and learning materials in education emergencies. So it doesn't go, all funding mostly does not go to the support of the disabilities, children with disabilities. What we have experienced in the past year is that there are many children with disabilities living in displaced IDP camps, And these children, they show they need support in education, they need to continue education, they want education. At the same time, the education partners and all education stakeholders, they are giving priority to the children who can run and who doesn't have disability or special education needs. So what we need is to increase our advocacy level in country level and international level, that all children must be given priorities, because when you go to the displaced campus, those who fled from climate change, flooding, crisis, drought, Somalia, there are different kinds of climate change problems, and also conflict is going on. Conflict between the warriors and the government, and conflict between the two clans clashing, conflict between area to area under the fodder for the animals. All these clashes continue, and they are causing flooding, and also the climate change is causing people to flee, and this is creating a burden to the children with disabilities. When even you go to the rural areas, children with disabilities do not go education. When you come to the urban areas, children with disabilities, families, they hold their children at home. And when you ask why, they say these children need protection from the other people. So parents, they say we are protecting them. They believe education centers, if in between the education center and the home, there is no vehicle movement for protection and something, so they are afraid of that. So we need to double our effort on education for disabilities advocacy. Thank you very much, all of you.
Адам, спасибо вам огромное.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think truly that the education and inclusive education is critical. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, in crisis situations, it is typically not a priority. And as groups of countries, we can support each other in raising awareness. Are there any other comments on how we can improve long-term cooperation? What can be done to share and mobilize best practices? And what new methods and technologies can be used to facilitate exchange? So I'm asking all of the participants of our symposium, anyone who has something to offer to answer this question. Tatiana, 1 minute.
Well, I think all the countries have been through such difficulties. Fortunately, in Uzbekistan, this is no longer an issue, and I'm so happy that our country is one of the leading ones in terms of introducing the inclusive education model. And thank you so much, Katerina, for all the support you have shown throughout this project, for teaching us so much. And I do hope that we will continue cooperating with Ekaterina later on. She has presented a brilliant overview of the situation in the 5 countries. And Katerina, it would be great if you could continue keeping in touch with us, teaching us, so that we would promote the ideas in the countries. I think that would be a great start of implementing this new inclusive education roadmap for the countries. I know that the government the governments in many countries would be interested to know the experience of their neighbors. And I think that these are all very good first steps towards further development of inclusive education. Again, if Katya, you continue working with us and teaching us, that would be really great. Thank you, Tatiana. So what we need is mentor support and drafting a roadmap for further cooperation. Guna, now it's over to you. Please tell us your specific proposals. And one more hand raised from Natia, also from Georgia. You know, we need to understand the mandate of KIX, and we need to understand that today the globe is facing a different stage of development. We are facing globalization, and our space on the planet is shrinking, I would say, calling for new approaches, for different approaches. And I fully support Tatiana. And I think that after this project, all the coordinators who were members of the consortium should sit down and develop a plan of action for our own countries and for countries of the consortium in general. Natia, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Yeah, over to you.
I would like to just congratulate because you finalized this wonderful project, and I think that it was really successful. And my recommendation will be to stay inclusive, because as I saw the whole process, design this project, design the consortium, then implementation the project, and then monitoring and finalize the project. The process was very inclusive, and my recommendation will be to stay inclusive. And the congratulations to your wonderful work. And we are waiting the report and the platform you're going to develop.
Спасибо большое, Натя. На самом деле, вот тут очень хороший...
Thank you so much, Natia. And a very good comment from Richard. In order to make the partnership better, we need to have more trust in each other, and cooperation based on mutual trust would help us building an inclusive society in our countries. And another comment from Moldova. The Moldova team says that there is a very clear regulation for the enrollment and inclusion of children in schools for those children who have migrated from Ukraine because of the war. And I think that inclusive education in emergencies could really become a future aspect of cooperation for all our countries. Another comment is that the project was rather limited in terms of time, but it has been very important for education, and we need to continue communicating and exchanging experience and using the created bases and databases for further sharing of inclusive successful inclusive practices. That's it for now. Up to our coordinator. Maybe you want to add something, Farida? Thank you so much, Aida. I wanted to share an important piece of information. I could see some questions in the chat at the beginning as to where the reports are going to be posted or published. So I want to answer this question. Of course, we will publish our country reports as well as the comparative report, and we will also disseminate links to the databases. Of course, these are going to be posted on the KIX EMAP website as well, so keep an eye on their news feed. And also, all the countries, upon agreement with the Ministry of Education, will be publishing the reports and the comparative report on the website of the National Ministry of Education, with links to the websites of the Ministries of Education of other consortium countries, so that people would be able to read the reports of the neighboring countries or find some good contacts for future cooperation. You know that the project has been implemented by governmental as well as non-governmental institutions and academia, and these partners are going to post links to the reports, to the databases as well, so you can follow the links posted on the websites of NGOs to the websites of the ministries of education of respective countries. And we do hope that the results of this project would be of interest not only for partners from our countries, but also for partners from the countries that were not part of the project, so that we would expand our cooperation and sharing and make inclusive education and education in general accessible to all children, and specifically to children with disabilities and special educational needs. Thank you to all coordinators from KIX EMAPs, and personally to Julia, to Veronica, for offering us technical as well as professional support. And thank you so much for these study tours that were a great opportunity to meet colleagues and to build bridges for further cooperation. Thank you so much, Farida. Dear colleagues, just to remind you that we have some links posted in the chat. By the way, the link to our today's symposium and all the presentations in Russian and in English will be posted on the websites. So please follow the links and keep an eye on the news feed to learn more about this very kind, very important project. And please actively use all the resources that KIX EMAP is kindly offering us. Thank you so much for your participation, for very interesting questions and comments, and for the precious time you have dedicated to this discussion. This discussion has demonstrated once again how important this topic is. And as Yulia previously said, it's just a beginning. And we hope that this cooperation will become a basis for further partnership in inclusive education. Thank you so much.